Today I'm going to talk you through how to change the shock absorbers on this CLK. This is a 2007 model 320 CDI. I'll put some details in the description below, but I believe that this video and the shock absorber setup will relate to a lot of different Mercedes cars, you know, the C Class as well as the CLK for certain time periods.
Okay, so these are all the tools that you're going to need. So trolley jack, scissor jack, axle stands, floodlight of some kind. I used a few different greases, products. So there's some WD-40 for anti-seizing, some white grease which is safe on rubber, you know, for you know, putting the shockers back in to make them go in more easily. Some carb cleaner for cleaning up threads before putting the Threadlock on. I've got a set of trim tools. So these are like plastic levers for getting fixings off. A head torch, quarter drive socket set, specialist sockets, so they're kind of like a Torx type socket. Variety of extension bars, torque wrench, mallet, hammer, punches, an assortment of ring spanners. Can't remember if I put the half-inch drive socket set, but as you can see, that's there. Strong bar, ratchet, various extensions, and then I just have some levers there, so you know, a bar and a few other things, you know, for helping get the shock absorber out or make the suspension arm drop down.
So I'm just going to remove this cover here. This is one of your rear suspension arms, and this is just a cover to keep the you know, the stones and water off of it. But anyway, the key thing is that the bolt that holds the shock absorber on at the bottom is underneath this cover. So it's a 10mm socket on either side. And then these screws come loose. And then after that it's just clipped on. So about halfway down there's a clip either side where it's clipping onto the arm. There you go. And so the bolt for the shock absorber at the bottom is just here. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through what I'm going to do here. So so I mentioned that the bolt for the shock absorber is here, and I'll just loosen that off but leave it in place for now. But you can see that the spring and the shock absorber are there in the background. So what you actually do is support this end of the suspension arm with say a jack or a trolley jack, and then remove that bolt and then slowly lower it down, which will take tension off of the spring and the shock absorber, and then you'll be able to take out the bottom bolt. And then in the boot, which I'll go and show you in a minute, is the top bolt for the shock absorber.
So here I'm just going to loosen off that shock absorber bottom bolt and leave it in place. Okay, apologies because the video footage didn't come out that well on the right hand side. So I've moved over to the left and you can see the setup's exactly the same. So progressing forward on here, I'll just pick up from where I left off working on the other side.
Okay, so I've already loosened off the bottom suspension arm nut there. So I'm just going to support it with the jack, which you can see here. And then I'm going to use a punch to push that bolt out through to the other side. And just a quick note, on this side of the car, the exhaust is quite close and makes access to the bolt a little bit awkward. So I actually used a little scissor jack just to push the exhaust a little bit up against the, well, gently pushing it up against the body of the car, and that just gave a little bit more clearance. Just to add, the reason that you're supporting the suspension arm with the jack is because the spring and the shocker are going to be pushing down on that arm. So if you push the bolt out with a punch, then that spring would try to push the arm down very quickly. So you want to move the trolley jack up underneath the bolt and support the suspension arm, but just be careful if you jack it up really hard up against the bolt, then you'll actually put tension on the bolt and make it difficult to punch it through. So what you want to be doing is just as the jack touches the bottom of the suspension arm and before it starts applying too much tension, leave it at that. Don't be tempted to keep jacking it higher and higher so that the jack's supporting the weight of the car or anything like that. Once you have the suspension arm bolt out, you're ready to lower the suspension arm down and take the tension off of the spring and the shock absorber. So just go ahead and lower the jack gently, but just bear in mind that the spring is obviously coming down and you don't want to drop it down too quickly because you want the spring to stay seated and for it to stay nice and tidy. Here you can see that the spring is just suspended in the air, so no tension on it at all now. It's actually not held in by anything now, so although sometimes they stick there and may actually stay in place, sometimes when you're working then they can suddenly fall, which is what I found out. So I actually recommend that you just wiggle that spring and pull it down out of the way, and then you can refit it again later. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove the shock absorber bottom bolt. Now that we've got the bottom bolt out, we need to access the nuts that are at the top of the shock absorber. So these are found in the boot. So the first thing we need to do is take the boot carpet out, and there's a couple of push studs at the top of the carpet that's holding it in place, and after that it just lifts out. And then we need the side trim removed, and this will be for both sides because we're doing both shock absorbers. Now the side trim's held in by a number of different press-in fittings. So I have some trim levers. They're like little plastic crowbars, and I use these to pop the trim studs off. But you can actually do it with a screwdriver as well. The trim levers just make it a little bit easier. So there's quite a lot of these little press studs. So there's some here just tucked away around this corner, and obviously there's some along the top of the piece of trim under what would be the parcel shelf area. So just have a look all the way around this panel and look for the little press studs and make sure you remove them all. This part of the side trim here just tucks underneath a piece of plastic that's still in the boot. So you just need to pull this back in order to be able to lift out the side trim. And here's the nut at the top of the shock absorber, which is still holding it in. To undo the top nut, you need to hold the shaft still by putting a spanner at the top here and making sure it doesn't spin. And then use another spanner to undo this nut. Now with the top nut undone, you should be able to remove the shock absorber. You'll just need to move the suspension arm around a little bit to get access, and then you should be able to pull the shock absorber down. It's always worth doing a quick comparison of the old parts and the new on the bench, just to check that they're as you expected them to be and look correct. This BILSTEIN new shock absorber came with new parts, so these parts go at the top of the shock absorber in the boot. And this is a new nut and bolt for the bottom. It's worth cleaning up the bottom mounting point with some emery cloth, just so that the new shock absorber goes in more easily. And also here I'm applying some white grease, again to make the new shocker go back in more easily. And also the white grease is rubber friendly in case any gets onto the rubber part of the shock absorber. Okay, it's time to refit the shock absorber. So you do this by making sure the shaft at the top of the shock absorber feeds up through this hole. So the shock absorber should now be up in place like this. And I'm just going to apply some white grease to it to make it go in easier. And now go ahead and lift the suspension arm up into place so that you can get the bottom bolt in. Now I'm going to put the spring up into place. When refitting the spring, it's worth noting that the top mount that the spring pushes into is actually profiled. So the end of the spring will come up against a stop that's molded into the rubber. Okay, so time to fit the parts back to the top of the shock absorber. So the rubber piece, the washer, and then the new nut. Tighten it up by hand. And then to tighten up further, remember to hold the top part of the spindle with a spanner here, and then tighten up the nut while making sure that the top part doesn't spin. Use the jack to push the suspension arm back into position and put the bolt back through. And now torque up the bolt for the suspension arm. I torqued this bolt up to 80 Newton meters. Ideally, the final torquing should be done once the car's been lowered and the suspension arm's back in the position it will be when the car's on the road. And now you can go ahead and torque up the bolt for the bottom of the shock absorber. I tightened this one up to 60 Newton meters. So here I'm just refitting the plastic stone guard back onto the suspension arm. And of course you have the boot trim to refit, which is it's pretty easy to do. Obviously, make sure that the tab on the trim that I showed during removal tucks underneath the plastic piece that's still in the boot, and then obviously just reuse all of your push stud fittings.
Okay, thank you for watching. Hopefully you found the video useful. If you have any comments or questions at all, then please go ahead and post them up and I'll try to help where I can. If you want to be kept notified of any further videos that I do, then please subscribe. If it's not useful for you, you can just ignore it. But if you haven't subscribed, then of course you might miss out. Finally, it really helps my channel grow if I get likes for my videos. So if you did find it useful, please take the time to give me a like and a thumbs up. I really appreciate it.